Welcome back to the channel. I hope you liked the last video on Jerome Powell. Today I want to talk to you about the U.S. national debt, promises made by each president to lower the U.S. national debt. As I stated in the prior videos, this channel was created to tell the truth, to be unbiased, and to let the record show where we're headed as a nation. There's a debt clock in Washington, D.C. to avert default by raising the nation's borrowing limit, which is drawing attention to the $37 trillion debt already owed by the United States government. The debt ceiling has continuously been raised at the fifth hour to prevent the country from failing to repay their loans. Janet Yellen, the previous U.S. Treasury Secretary, has warned Congress that the United States will eventually run out of money. Every modern president since 1981 has vowed to tackle the debt and inflation, yet the national debt has continued to balloon from $1 trillion in 1981 to $34 trillion today. This illustration shows you, no matter what side of the aisle each president resides on, the national debt has continued to progress upward since 1977. Along the way, we have had a U.S. financial crisis in 2008 and a global pandemic in 2019 to 2020, which has increased the national debt by 35%. Each side will continue to blame the previous administration, but the numbers show that each president has contributed their fair share in adding to the national debt. Let's break down the gaps between promises and reality. Let's go.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem. It is time to reawaken this industrial giant, to get government back within its means, and to lighten our punitive tax burden. And these will be our first priorities, and on these principles there will be no compromise.
During Ronald Reagan's presidential campaign, the U.S. national debt increased by 186%. This is the result of the Reagan administration's attempts to stabilize the economy through the 1981 to 1982 recession known as Reaganomics, which added $1.86 trillion to the national debt. The pillars of Reagan's economic policy were cutting government spending, tax cuts on income tax and capital gains, deregulation, and tightening the money supply in order to reduce inflation. Reagan's supply-side economic policies, his opponents referred to these policies as trickle-down economics, didn't grow the economy enough to offset the lost revenue from his tax cuts. On top of these policies, Reagan also increased defense spending by 35%.
And I'm the one who will not raise taxes. My opponent now says he'll raise them as a last resort or a third resort. But when a politician talks like that, you know that's one resort he'll be checking into. And my opponent won't rule out raising taxes, but I will, and the Congress will push me to raise taxes, and I'll say no. And they'll push, and I'll say no. And they'll push again, and I'll say to them, read my lips. No new taxes.
This is a prime example of the colloquialism, if a politician's mouth is moving, he's lying. During George H.W. Bush's Oval Office campaign, the national debt increased by $1.55 trillion, or a 54% increase from the $2.857 trillion at the end of Reagan's presidency. Key factors that contribute to the increase in national debt during his time was the savings and loans crisis. This crisis involved widespread insolvencies among savings and loan institutions, which the government ultimately had to address, incurring significant costs. The 1990 budget deal, President Bush worked with Congress to enact a budget deal that included spending cuts and tax increases to address a rising federal deficit. While the deal aimed to reduce the deficit over 5 years, the combination of economic recession, the savings, and loan bailout, and increasing health care costs largely offset these measures. President Bush also dealt with the 1990 recession, which was heavily impacted by the budget deal, which led to higher deficits.
We'll use part of the surplus to provide substantial fiscal discipline has widened opportunity and created hope for all working people in our country. Now we have a chance to do even more, to use the fruits of our prosperity today to strengthen our prospects for tomorrow, indeed for tomorrow's well into the 21st century. As required by law, my administration is releasing the mid-session review, $179 billion to the projected budget surplus over 5 years. Steps I will propose to use the surplus will increase Medicare's solvency for at least 25 years. By taking additional measures to increase competition, combat fraud, and reduce costs, we can provide a new prescription drug benefit and still pay down our national debt. Strengthen Medicare. My plan now will not counting the receipts from Social Security. That we have now cut up Washington's credit card. Now we can pay off the debt. By 2015, this country can be entirely out of debt. This is a remarkable milestone, but it is clearly within reach. If we do not squander the surplus by choosing short-term gain over long-term national goals. Discipline has widened opportunity and created hope for all working people. I think we should achieve these objectives. Within the framework of achieving these objectives, obviously I'll be working with the Congress to achieve them. Thank you.
You want to run for Senate from Arkansas?
Medicare, and to pay down the national debt.
During Bill Clinton's presidency, the U.S. national debt showed a mixed trend, experiencing growth in the early years, but significantly slowing down and even seeing a pay down in its later years, leading to a projected elimination of the publicly held debt. The Clinton administration implemented a three-part economic strategy focused on fiscal discipline, investments in people, and open markets abroad. This strategy, along with a booming economy driven by the tech sector, contributed to a decline in federal spending as a share of the economy and a rise in tax revenues, leading to budget surpluses from 1998 to 2001. This resulted in the largest debt paydown in the history of the United States. The publicly held debt was reduced by $363 billion, a record 3-year paydown. By the end of 2001, the total 4-year paydown reached $600 billion, the largest in American history.
In other words, as a result of the hard work of the American people, this economy is growing. The growing economy has yielded more tax revenues than anticipated, and because of fiscal restraint, those tax revenues went to reduce our deficit. The deficit today is at 1.2% of GDP, which is lower than the average of the last 40 years. February, it was projected that our deficit would be $244 billion. And today, with Congress to set priorities, we can be fiscally responsible, and we can head toward balance, and that's exactly where we're headed. Now the fundamental question is whether the United States Congress will work constructively with the administration to keep taxes low and to keep spending sound. Hard work of the American people. This economy is growing. The growing economy has yielded more tax revenue. It's very important for Congress to also understand that they should not be trying to take money out of the pockets of the small business owners and working people. One of the reasons why this economy is robust is because taxes are low. And in order to keep making sure that this economy grows, we got to keep them low. After all, people are working here in America. The director informed us that the actual deficit is 160.
George Bush added $6.1 trillion to the nation's debt, the second largest amount in dollars. This took national debt from $5.8 trillion in 2001 to $11.9 trillion in 2009, a 105% increase. Bush presided over two simultaneous wars, which were initiated in response to 9/11 attacks. The war in Afghanistan, which added $1.1 trillion, and the Iraq war at $1 trillion. This military spending from $306 billion in 2001 to $661 billion in 2009, a 117% increase. Bush also dealt with two recessions. The recession of 2001, which resulted in two tax cuts. The recession of 2008 brought about a $700 billion bailout for banks and financial institutions.
This administration has inherited a $1.3 trillion deficit, the largest in our nation's history, and our investments to rescue our economy will add to that deficit in the short term. We also have long-term challenges, healthcare, energy, education, and others that we can no longer afford to ignore. But I want to be very clear, if the message was not effectively delivered by the three previous speakers. We cannot and will not sustain deficits like these without end. Contrary to the prevailing wisdom in Washington these past few years, we cannot simply spend as we please and defer the consequences to the next budget, the next administration, or the next generation. We are paying the price for these deficits right now. In 2008 alone, we paid $250 billion in interest on our debt, 1 in every 10 taxpayer dollars. That is more than 3 times what we spent on education that year, more than 7 times what we spent on VA health care. So if we confront this crisis without also confronting the deficits that helped cause it, we risk sinking into another crisis down the road as our interest payments rise, our obligations come due, confidence in our economy erodes, and our children and our grandchildren are unable to pursue their dreams because they're saddled with our debts. And that's why today I'm pledging to cut the deficit we inherited by half by the end of my first term in office. Now, this will not be easy. It will require us to make difficult decisions and face challenges we've long neglected. But I refuse to leave our children with a debt that they cannot repay. And that means taking responsibility right now, in this administration, for getting our spending under control.
President Obama holds the title for growing the national debt the most, dollar-wise. In total, debt levels increased by $8.34 trillion. This makes him the president with the 11th largest increase in national debt in presidential history. Obama continued to fight the Great Recession of 2008 with an $800+ billion economic stimulus package. Like Reagan and Bush, 43 before him, Obama instituted tax cuts that added $858 billion to the debt. Obama's biggest increase came in spending through the Social Security Act, where budgets increased by $262 billion.
I'm the king of debt. I understand debt better than probably anybody. I know how to deal with debt.
You tax China, they stop financing our debt, our economy collapses.
We tax China, we'll pay off their debt very quickly.
When I heard we were going to Iraq, somebody said, "Oh, we're going for the oil." I said, that makes sense. That's smart. $15 trillion. That does a lot to solve our deficit problem, doesn't it?
We have a country that's essentially a debtor nation right now. So we're going to make our country wealthy again. Believe me, we're in a bubble. We have artificially low interest rates.
If interest rates go up and we can buy bonds back at a discount, if we are liquid enough as a country, we should do that.
I am not happy with what he's doing. I'd like to pay off debt. I'd like to do other things and pay interest. Well,
we got a lot of it.
We do, and we're going to start reducing costs now that we took care of our military.
This is the United States government. First of all, you never have to default because you print the money. I hate to tell you, okay? So there's never a default.
During Donald Trump's first campaign, the national debt rose by $7.8 trillion during Trump's time in office. When Donald Trump took office on January 20, 2017, the total federal debt was $19.94 trillion. Upon leaving the office, the gross federal debt was $27.8 trillion by the day he left office in January of 2021. The causes of this increase was the pandemic relief legislation and executive orders, which was 3.6 trillion, tax cut laws, 2.5 trillion, spending increases, 2.3 trillion. The largest individual factors was the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which increased the debt by 1.9 trillion. The bipartisan budget acts of 2018 and 2019, which added 2.1 trillion, and the CARES Act, which added 1.9 trillion.
President Biden says his proposed budget will shore up entitlement programs such as Medicare while decreasing the deficit.
I will protect Social Security and Medicare without any change. Guaranteed. I won't allow them to be gutted or eliminated, as MAGA Republicans threatened to do.
Over the 4 years of President Biden's term, he approved $4.7 trillion in new 10-year debt. Biden approved an additional $380 billion in his final weeks in office by signing into law the American Relief Act and the Social Security Fairness Act. President Biden also added another $200 billion to the debt by approving it to the Thrifty Food Plan. In addition to signing $3.4 trillion of 10-year borrowing into law through legislation, President Biden also approved $1.2 trillion of new 10-year debts from the executive actions and regulations submitted by his administration. Most of this sum came from student loan actions, including $145 billion from student loan repayment pauses, $145 billion from targeted student debt cancellations, and $330 billion from SAVE, income-driven repayment plan, which is now on hold pending court action. In conclusion, no president since 1981 has seriously cut debt. Instead, they blame the other party, they print money through inflation and tax, they kick the can to the next generation. Until we reform entitlements, defense, and taxes, debt will keep growing. And you will pay through inflation, higher taxes, or a collapsing dollar. What's the solution? Audit the Fed, gold standard, crypto. Comment below and hit like if you want a follow-up video on how to fix this mess. Peace.